Hello, welcome back to my Stuarts vlog. This is episode 17, and this time we're looking at changing ideas in Stuart society. This episode is going to look at the Levellers and the Diggers. We'll mention the Quakers and Ranters, though we're not going to go into them. We're going to look at Thomas Hobbes, Francis Bacon, and John Locke, and the Royal Society, and briefly mention Sir Isaac Newton as well. So there's quite a lot to get through. The main, this is part of topic 3, theme 3, changing ideas and society. And I guess the main way in which this could be examined would be about how much things change as a result. So bear that in mind as you're learning about these things. You kind of want to look at why, despite their failures, do these groups have significance, and perhaps how successful are they at changing thoughts. I have also seen them be part of a factor type question. I think there's one about radical political and religious ideas. How much did that undermine the Republic? And I guess also you could have a more general question about how things change in Stuart society. But in general, I reckon you're looking at that more sort of change continuity, or perhaps, of course, I have seen a significance question here. How significant were these groups or ideas? So let's start with the radical political groups, the Levellers, who are probably seen as bigger and more important, and then the Diggers. And both of them come out of the Civil War and are active in the mid to late 1640s. The Levellers from about 1645 to 1649. They're led by John Lilburne. Other leaders include William Walwyn, Walwyn, and William Overton, exactly how it sounds, Overton. And they're mostly kind of London-based, and they publish a manifesto called An Agreement of the People, which of course hadn't been agreed by the people in any way, shape or form. But that's one of the idiosyncrasies of history, I suppose. Now, their ideas were actually quite sort of proto-democratic. They liked the House of Commons. They wanted universal male suffrage, so no votes for women, but universal male suffrage. And they thought of equality before the law and freedom of religion as both being very important to implement. And they wanted to sweep away both the power of the monarch, if not the monarch himself, and also the House of Lords. Actually, these reforms were kind of too radical for the gentry to get alongside, but also too limited to gain much popular support. Not least, women. There's nothing there for women, and nothing there for rural groups either. And so that's one of the reasons that they kind of don't gain so much traction. However, they do gain some support in the New Model Army. In October 1647, you have these famous Putney debates in Putney about kind of the future of the country, and the Levellers are quite prominent there. And in 1648 they bring a petition to Parliament signed by 98,000 people. So they do have some popularity, particularly in the short term. They're pretty well organised, and they have a coherent package of reforms. But that alliance with the New Model Army falls apart in 1649. March 1649, John Lilburne and other leaders are arrested, and then in May 1649 the Levellers kind of encourage a mutiny in the army, and there's an uprising in Burford, Burford, and the Levellers are trapped and shot for mutiny. And that's kind of the end of the Levellers really as a group. John Lilburne goes on later to join the Quaker movement, but the Leveller movement sort of dies that death there for our period. So significance in that short term of kind of encouraging a bit of democracy, but in the longer term, it doesn't really work out for them. Coming out of them, the Diggers, who call themselves the true Levellers, perhaps inspired by them, is better than coming out of them. These are led by Gerard Winstanley. And they believed in total social and political equality, to the extent that they would insist on compulsory education for both boys and, wait for it, girls as well. And they would get rid of the House of Lords and the monarchy too. They're sort of almost proto-communist in the way that they approach things, and they tried to set up little communities in several places, most famously in St George's Hill, just outside of London, where they took over the common land and dug it up to grow vegetables and food that they held in common. They said that they were against private ownership of land and felt that everything should be kind of shared, and that there was equality in that sharing. Now, the key here actually is that both here in this London community and in the various other smaller scattered communities across the South and the Midlands, it is the local people who resist them and act against them and actually take them to court in many cases. And the diggers are, their movement collapses really because they are unable to get the support of those local people. And so they sort of flare kind of in the late 1640s, but their influence is minimal, I would say, in the Stuart era. You might claim, of course, that they help lay the path or trailblaze a bit for later radicals and, of course, communists as well. But that's not really within our time scope. So politically radical groups have quite limited influence in this period. There are a couple of fellows who do have influence in terms of political thinking, and they are Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, working in sort of two slightly variant directions. Thomas Hobbes is around earlier. He actually left England in 1640 and lived in France for a bit, and it was in 1651 from France that he produced his most famous work, which is called Leviathan. In Leviathan, he said it was a political defense of the Republic. He said that, and against divine right thinking. He said that there shouldn't be this idea that God has put the king in place and that therefore he has a divine right to do whatever he likes. He said instead, power actually rests with the people and power is granted to the monarch by the people, and that therefore between the monarch and the people there exists a social contract, and that if the Leviathan goes against this, then they're kind of within their rights to get rid of that monarch. However, he did also say that the best way of running a country was to have a strong central figure, and that is kind of the Leviathan. John Locke was a bit later on. He was on the continent in the 1670s and 1680s, and in fact he only comes back to England in 1689, so right at the end of our course, when two treaties of government is published anonymously to start with. This actually is written to counter a book that had appeared earlier by Robert Filmer, Filmer, which is called Patriarcha. In fact, I'll spell that for you as well if you want. Patriarcha. Patriarcha by Robert Filmer had been in favour of divine right, and John Locke wrote further on this sort of contractual theory of government that the monarch doesn't have the right to do whatever he wants because there is this contract between the people and the monarch. He talked about the equality of man. He talked about popular sovereignty, that power is held by the people. And he talked about there being a law of nature, so that again that absolute monarchy had its limits because there was a law of nature, kind of an inherent set of rights that should not be trodden on or done away with, however powerful the monarch is. Therefore, he was very in favour of the right of resistance against a tyrant, and his work, Two Treaties of Government, was used, or his thinking at least, was used as a justification of the Glorious Revolution. So in terms of ideas changing here, Hobbes and Locke, I would say, are more reflective of ideas changing than they are persuading ideas to change, but they do both certainly reflect the times that they live in and kind of give flesh and bone and structure to those new constitutional ideas of the Republic and of the Glorious Revolution, and of that kind of balance of power between the people and the monarch, or the people and the government. So finally, sort of after radical political groups and political thinkers, we also have this idea of the scientific revolution and the impact or growing impact of science on society. And this thinking kind of comes out of the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, the idea had been to reclaim old thinking, to rediscover scientific thinking from the past. Whereas in the 17th century, it's very much a sense of new scientific discovery pushing forward. And that's sparked by people like Galileo, and then brought to England by people like Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon actually dies in 1626, but he's the founder of empiricism, and by which we mean really the founder of modern scientific thought, that he had this idea that science should be based on evidence and experimentation. very much in the way that we think of science today. And that Baconian method is taken up by others. It's influential in many leading scientists, including Thomas Brown with an E, and then in the founding of the Royal Society. So there's quite certainly a large amount of influence that Bacon has on the scientific community. Now, how big an influence you think that is on society is a different matter, and I would argue that it's probably limited. But on the scientific community, without doubt. Other people that are around at this time that affect the science of the era, William Harvey, he published in 1628. He's the guy who had the first sort of discovery that actually it was the heart that pumped blood around the body. Robert Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E, who's thought of as being the first modern chemist. Robert Hooke, H-O-O-K-E, he discovered cells and did a lot of work in microbiology, and wrote a book about how to use a microscope that really pioneered that work amongst scientists. And of course, Isaac Newton, who discovered things in optics and made breakthroughs in mathematics, but is most famous apparently not just for the gravity discovery, but also for unpacking the 3 laws of motion, which are the basic principles apparently that stand behind modern physics. So Isaac Newton particularly helpful and famous, although some of his work is after 1688, so do but be careful about that if you're looking stuff up about him. Isaac Newton also connected very much with the Royal Society. The Royal Society was founded, or given its Royal Charter rather, in 1662 by Charles II, and that really gives it a kick forward and promotes it and establishes it as a real body of cutting edge scientific thought. But it did kind of come out of meetings and discussions between scientists that have been happening even back as far as the 1640s, certainly through the 1650s. So it's not like Charles II kind of magicked into existence the Royal Society. He'd sort of put his stamp on something that was probably already happening a bit anyway. However, the Royal Society does play a key role in promoting and spreading scientific ideas, and scientific Royal Society copies are established in other continental countries around this time too. It's important that it's the elite and the professional classes that go along to frequent the Royal Society, because it shows that science was being accepted and seen as being given approval by those classes, and that they were kind of getting behind it. And also, you might talk about the journal, the first ever scientific journal in the world, which was published from 1665. It's called the Philosophical Transactions. And that was put into place to publicise discoveries and to build support for what the Royal Society was doing. So again, I wouldn't overstate what the Royal Society does or its significance. Its significance in the scientific community and in spreading ideas is important, and over the next 50 to 100 years it plays a big role. Whether it had really fulfilled much of that role by 1688, I'm pretty sceptical, and whether you could go to any market town in England and ask them about science, again I'm pretty sceptical. I suppose the overlap would be perhaps in the greater educational breakthroughs in the ideas of agriculture, breeding and seeds and all that sort of jazz. But other than that, it's hard to see really how it impacted on ordinary life for most people, even if ideas are changing amongst the elite. I hope that's helpful. I'll see you next time when we move on to the economy. Cheerio.